Good evening. It's Tuesday, the 7th of February. Tonight, the extent of the devastation from a powerful earthquake and subsequent aftershocks becomes clearer in Turkiye and Syria. As the death toll continues to climb, more and more families are grieving their loved ones. But in the midst of an unfolding disaster, we see remarkable tales of survival and communities coming together in search and rescue efforts. You're watching The World. Hello, I'm Yvonne Yong. It's been almost 34 hours since a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck near the southern Turkish city of Gaziantep, and desperate search and rescue operations are still underway in areas worst hit in Turkiye and Syria. The tremors brought down thousands of buildings, including apartment blocks, killing occupants and trapping many others under the rubble. Tragically, the death toll has continued to spiral upwards, now standing at more than 5,000 across both countries. The WHO says it's expecting that figure to be significantly higher. There have also been several powerful aftershocks that have impacted efforts to save lives. But rescuers are also being hampered by freezing conditions, with temperatures hitting below 0 degrees. Let's get some perspective on the scale of the disaster. And this drone footage was taken over the epicenter of Gaziantep in southern Turkey. It's clear that several buildings have been completely flattened. Locals here have been waiting for help, with many sifting through the rubble themselves in the hope of finding loved ones. And in the other badly hit province of Hatay, people could be heard screaming from beneath the toppled buildings. In a warning, the clip we're about to show contains images that are confronting.
Yüksek sesle konuş! Yüksek sesle!
They're calling out, but nobody comes. We're finished. They asked to be rescued, but we can't help them.
In the midst of despair, tales of survival have also emerged from the rubble. In the city of Kahramanmaraş, a rescue worker races away from the side of a collapsed building carrying a young girl who was pulled out alive. Family members are seen running towards them as the man collapses into the snow and bursts into tears. The girl's father then emerges carrying his son, who also was found alive among the ruins. There were dramatic scenes in the Syrian city of Atma as well, where rescuers retrieved a young child alive from a collapsed building. The area is Syria's last rebel-held enclave, housing millions of displaced people who fled their homes during the country's civil war. Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Tom Joyner, who is in Istanbul. Now, Tom, the death toll is rising rapidly as bodies are being pulled out from under the rubble.
That's right, Yvonne. The death toll has been climbing rapidly over the last day and a half, now over 5,000. What began yesterday morning in the early hours in Turkey of a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and initial reports of only dozens of casualties has now risen to a catastrophic level of damage, and that death toll appears to only continue to climb. Authorities fear that it will continue like this and that the peak hasn't been reached yet of this disaster. As you mentioned, the World Health Organization, the WHO, is fearful that the full picture, the total number of people killed, could well and truly eclipse another massive earthquake disaster in 1999 here in Turkey, which killed 17,000 people in the Istanbul area. But rescue workers are certainly struggling against difficult conditions in the south of this country and over the border in Syria to try and change that. These are crucial hours, Yvonne. This is the second day. It's been 2 nights and 2 days of continued rescue efforts. It's been a really hard slog for a lot of those rescue workers It's freezing cold. It's snowing. You can probably see a few snowflakes around me. Here it's really tough and it's slow going. Airports and major highways are closed. Flights into the quake zone have been either delayed or cancelled. So getting the help they need has been a little bit tough. But even for the survivors, the people who could still be rescued, they face another set of challenges of their own. These are people who might still be buried under the rubble and who have dealt now with 2 freezing nights, hoping and praying that they'll be found.
Indeed, Tom, just watching those apartment blocks crumble, it's really hard to imagine anyone could have survived that, but yet there have been some amazing tales of survival. What else have you been hearing?
Well, that's right. We heard just a little earlier as well, one of those examples. We've seen really, really emotional video coming out of the quake zone. Some of those rescue workers pulling young children who've been buried under chunks of concrete and twisted metal for a long time, for more than a day, who are still alive. It's truly incredible, and those rescue workers have been just overcome with relief. We have no idea how many people remain trapped in the rubble, as I say, but so far thousands of people have been rescued, so there is a glimmer of hope. This is a really crucial time in these early days following the initial disaster. So there's still hope yet, although that window is closing.
Are aftershocks still being felt, or what has been the impact of some of these after the quake on Monday morning?
Most definitely, Yvonne. Those aftershocks in some cases have been deadly. That initial 7.8 magnitude earthquake around 4 a.m. Turkiye time on Monday, around 35 hours ago, was just the start. There's been a series of deadly aftershocks since then. And on top of that, there have been subsequent earthquakes as well, one yesterday afternoon and also one this morning which rated around 5.6 magnitude. So these all pose dangers to rescue workers who are already, as I say, facing difficult wintry conditions. The aftershocks and subsequent earthquakes have also collapsed more buildings as well. So not only was it the initial quake yesterday, but also the rescue efforts are hampered by continued risk as well.
And Tom, how many people roughly have been displaced, and are many of them fleeing the disaster zone?
Yvonne, there's no way of knowing at this point in time how many people have been pushed from their homes. We know that from the beginning of this, from yesterday morning, that authorities had been urging people in partially collapsed buildings or in apartment blocks in areas that have been affected to evacuate. A lot of people have fled to find shelter. It's been pelting rain and snow, so that's hard to come by. People have been sheltering in cars. They've been huddling around makeshift fires in streets. Some have left entirely the region, but we won't ever know, well, for the moment, how many people that is. But it's difficult circumstances. People have been rendered effectively homeless. If they've survived, they now have a different set of challenges to deal with, which is the reality of their home utterly destroyed. Entire apartment blocks of 7 to 10 stories just crushed in a matter of seconds. They now have the challenge of finding somewhere safe for their family.
Is it dangerous to be in areas already damaged by the quake for fear of more buildings collapsing?
Absolutely, Yvonne. This is an ongoing, unfolding ordeal. And as I say, the authorities fear that we haven't even come close to the peak of this disaster yet. So without a doubt, there is a risk to both the rescuers and survivors to come. In Syria, of course, it's a different picture entirely. It's a country that's been through more than 11 years of civil war and bombardment by regime forces there, and fighting with opposition and rebel groups as well. So particularly in areas affected by this quake, people might have already had their buildings bombarded by aircraft already. And this quake has just added a second disaster on top of that. We're also talking in Syria about many people who might have already fled their homes before because of the civil war. So displaced people, millions of them across that part of the country, vulnerable already from the fighting, now facing this second disaster.
And lastly, Tom, how have authorities responded to the crisis and how much are they relying on international support?
Well, the Turkish government has been quick to say that their response has been swift and effective. We heard that from the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan yesterday. But certainly as this disaster has unfolded, as there have been more and more casualties, as the death toll has rapidly climbed, it's clear that there will be an enormous need for the international support that started to pour in from around the world. Dozens and dozens of countries have offered it. Some have even already mobilised rescue teams or provided humanitarian products and aid or specially trained dogs to help find survivors or mapping equipment. So as this continues to develop, that international help will be critical. The question is how quickly can it arrive and how quickly can it be made effective? We've seen flights cancelled and delayed for help coming in from around the rest of Turkey, but some of those international teams should be arriving now, if not already, then in the next coming hours and days. And without a doubt, there'll be a reliance on that. Another question that remains unanswered is to the extent to which the Turkish government might have been prepared for a disaster of this scale. I mentioned earlier that tragic disaster in 1999 of the earthquake in the Istanbul area, which killed at least 17,000 people. This area that Turkey is on sits astride a number of fault lines, which makes it a hotbed of this sort of earthquake activity. It's not unusual. There have been many in recent history. So there will be questions raised once time has passed enough for investigations to begin around how prepared Turkey was, its government was, to deal with a disaster of this scale.
Tom Joyner, thank you so much for updating us. The head of the United Nations is calling on countries to respond with generosity in the wake of the earthquake. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres extended his condolences to the people of Syria and Turkiye and urged the global community to help a region that's already experienced so much hardship.
During my tenure as High Commissioner for Refugees, I went several times to work in that area. And I will never forget the extraordinary demonstration of generosity of the people of the area. It is time for all of us to show the same solidarity that I've witnessed in the area in relation to refugees fleeing one of the most difficult conflicts of our time.
And those calls are being heeded by neighbouring countries and across Asia. 10 search and rescue teams from 8 European Union countries have also been mobilised to help first responders in Turkey. In a statement, the European Commission said units from Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, France, Greece, Poland, the Netherlands and Romania are heading over. Meanwhile, Germany's Federal Agency for Technical Relief is preparing to set up camps to provide shelter and clean water.
Nochmal sagen, wir sind solidarisch und
we stand with you in solidarity and we suffer with you. It's very sad and a huge catastrophe. That's why we, along with others, have offered to help with all possibilities we have. We're in the process of coordinating with the Turkish government and everyone else in Europe and elsewhere.
Despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country also stands at the ready to offer support.
My sincere condolences to Turkish President Erdogan and to all Syrians who have lost loved ones and their homes. Ukraine has immediately responded and offered Turkey support in its rescue operation.
Istanbul airport has been overrun with volunteers, rescue workers and NGO members wanting to join aid efforts in southern Turkey. State media shows vision of hundreds of people with backpacks and high-vis clothing trying to enter the terminal. Istanbul's governor claims in the space of 24 hours, around 13,000 people have left for affected areas. The US is coordinating immediate assistance to NATO member Turkey. Nearly 100 Los Angeles County firefighters and structural engineers are being sent, along with specially trained dogs. And here in Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced financial assistance during a press conference alongside his New Zealand counterpart, Chris Hipkins.
These multiple earthquakes that have hit the region are having a devastating impact, and today I can announce that the Australian government will provide an initial $10 million in humanitarian assistance to those affected through our Red Cross and Red Crescent partners and through humanitarian agencies.
We know a little bit about earthquakes in New Zealand and the significant effect that that can have on people. So our hearts are with them. New Zealand will also be contributing to the international effort. We have the Minister of Foreign Affairs in New Zealand will release details of the $1.5 million that we'll also be contributing.
Well, let's go live now to Gaziantep, the epicenter of the initial 7.8 magnitude quake, where we can see search and rescue operations underway. It's been going on for more than 30 hours now, non-stop rescue efforts. Heavy machinery is being used to lift massive pieces of debris. Of course, thousands of buildings have collapsed across southern Turkiye and northwest Syria as well, so similar scenes across those regions. Now, the first quake, as we heard from Tom, struck just after the early hours of Monday morning. That measured 7.8 magnitude, and a second 7.5 magnitude quake hit the same region not long after. You can imagine residents barely having time to comprehend what's happened in the first quake before being struck again, and in multiple aftershocks. There is a lot of devastation. Search and rescue efforts are underway. This is Gaziantep, the epicenter of the initial quake. Rescuers looking to pull more people from the rubble. Well, Syria's white helmets are no strangers to pulling people out of the rubble. They've been helping those living in northwest Syria since the start of the civil war. Now they're working around the clock to rescue survivors from the earthquake. But white helmet volunteer Ismail Al-Abdullah says the damage is extensive and they desperately need international support.
The situation is very horrible, difficult for us as rescue workers. We have many destroyed buildings across northwest Syria, many villages. In every village, in every city, there's buildings collapsed on the civilians. Tens of families are trapped beneath the rubble. Our efforts are not enough to rescue them. We're working in full capacity, non-stop working since the 30 hours up to now. All the teams are in the field. We're facing many major difficulties. We don't have enough heavy equipment to deal with the large scale of rubble. The rubble is like mountains. Not just one heavy equipment can handle this. This disaster, it's bigger than any NGO operating in northwest Syria. We need international effort to support us as the state supporting other countries in such a disaster. The winter, the time that here in northwest Syria, it's disaster by itself, by its own. People are suffering already, and the buildings that collapsed, most of them were damaged by the bombing, by the Assad's forces and Russia. The health sector that is exhausted by the bombing. Many hospitals were destroyed, many medical facilities destroyed. All of that made the situation worse on northwest Syria.
And what's been your personal experience? Describe for us what you've seen and what you've heard people say in the aftermath of this disaster.
My personal experience starts from the very beginning, from the seconds of the earthquake. I was sleeping beside my three daughters, when the earth started to shake, and the earth was moving under our feet, and the ceiling was, the whole building was shaking. After seconds, I was shocked that my next neighbor, their house was collapsed, and there were 17 people who died. After that, I moved to another side. I saw 6 buildings. 6 buildings were collapsed and destroyed, and tens of people were under the rubble.
What's the estimate on the number of people who've been affected and the destruction that this earthquake has caused in Syria?
We documented that more than 300 buildings collapsed completely, and many others were partially damaged. We don't have exact number for those who were affected by the earthquake, but what we know that there are thousands of people beneath the rubble right now waiting for help, waiting for us to get them alive before we lose them. So we urging and we asking to urgent help from any side from the states that support us. Water, food kits, hygiene kits, drinkable water for those who lost everything and now they are staying in the streets, under the trees. In the first place, they were displaced many times before by the Assad's forces. They thought this time they will not be displaced or hurt, but the earthquake increased the suffering of population in northwest Syria.
And tell us more about the challenges that you faced in trying to rescue and search for people who are stuck underneath the rubble.
Oh, we need to respond to everyone. It's our responsibility to save the people. It's our responsibility to save everyone. We're working on full capacity, but the big number of damaged houses and buildings, it's over our capacity, it's over our ability, and we're working around the clock, but it needs more support. It needs that everyone is hearing us to support us in this mission.
Well, as we've been reporting, the death toll has reached more than 5,000 as a frantic round-the-clock rescue effort continues in Turkiye and war-ravaged Syria. Thousands of people have been rescued from the rubble so far, but many more remain trapped with continuing aftershocks and freezing temperatures. The rescue is painfully slow and difficult as the massive scale of this disaster becomes clear.
Running for their lives as a building collapses during an aftershock in the eastern city of Malatya. Moments after a second powerful earthquake, a Turkish reporter doing a live television broadcast rushes to help a child to safety. Thousands of buildings have collapsed in Turkiye and in neighbouring Syria. Apartment blocks fell like dominoes. The war-torn city of Aleppo is one of the worst hit in Syria. Entire neighbourhoods and villages were destroyed in minutes. It's hard to believe anyone can be lifted out of these buildings alive.
My grandson is 18 months old. Please help my family, please. They were at the 12th floor. We can't reach them.
The scale of this disaster is hard to comprehend. The death toll is expected to climb significantly. Governments around the world have been quick to respond, sending in aid, equipment and emergency teams. Australia has pledged $10 million in humanitarian assistance. At the epicenter, where temperatures are below freezing, people who managed to escape with their lives are left with nothing.
We are freezing and getting wet. We have no place to go, no place to stay.
The top priority now is to find people under the rubble. The recovery from this disaster will take years. Tom Joyner, ABC News, Istanbul.
Well, the World Health Organization says Syria's humanitarian needs are now paramount as its death toll keeps rising. The group says while Turkey has the capacity to respond to the crisis, it's been difficult to assess the needs in Syria due to the long-running civil war.
We're especially concerned about areas where we do not yet have information. Damage mapping is ongoing to understand where we need to focus our attention. Numbers do not tell us about the perilous situation that many families now face, having lost everything, forced to sleep outside in the middle of winter. It's now a race against time.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by UNICEF's Senior Emergency Advisor for the whole of Syria, Melinda Young. Melinda, describe for us what work is like for you right now.
Well, I'm currently in Gaziantep in Turkey, which was affected highly by the earthquake. So it's quite challenging for mounting a response in Syria. Currently the office here for UNICEF is hosting 120 people as an emergency shelter itself. Haven't actually slept in 2 days or washed in 2 days, and we're melting snow just to be able to try and flush the toilets. But we're doing that while mounting the Syria response. And at least I'm in a relatively safe building here at the moment. But in terms of kids and families in Syria, and particularly in northwest Syria, it's very hard in terms of knowing the level of terror that there was here, kids just screaming in the corridors, the utter petrification of families, but knowing that in Syria, that's with children that have been through over 10 years of conflict, constant displacements, they're now going through a cholera crisis, and now this earthquake on top of it, it's almost unimaginable. But we're just essentially, I'm sleeping next to my desk when I sleep as we just mount as rapid a response as we can.
Melinda, which areas of northwest Syria are you focusing on and how are you getting aid there?
Well, I focus on the non-government controlled areas, so the opposition-held areas, which we provide assistance across the border from Turkey. So that's the northern areas of Aleppo and in Idlib. So we work with organisations, non-governmental organisations, community organisations who have been working in Syria for the last 10 years, are very connected with communities, live with those communities. And we assist them with technical advice, funding, supplies, coordination, all of those elements in terms of having a kind of a coherent response into Syria.
And what are some of the challenges that you're facing in coordinating this aid for those affected by the quake?
Well, access to start with, because many of the responders are impacted by the earthquakes themselves. They may have been killed, injured. They've got to look after their own families. They don't have their own shelter in order to work from, as well as the families themselves. The transshipment hub that goes from Turkey into northwest Syria is currently closed. Gaziantep airport is closed. So all of those elements make it quite challenging. Also, it's been snowy in the last week. And of course, there's a lot of confusion. So at the moment, the main priority is particularly on the assessment of what is happening, what is the level of damage that we're seeing. We know schools have been damaged, water systems have been damaged, and therefore, what is the best targeted assistance that we can provide?
It's really good to get your thoughts on this because there's been a lot of coverage of the impact on Turkiye, less on Syria, but the devastation there is really significant.
Well, it's also a compounded devastation because you've got the years of conflict, which many people in northwest Syria have displaced often up to 10 times just in that area in those last 10 years. Many people are displaced such that they don't have homes, they don't have shelters. And so that on top of a water crisis, there's been a drought, cholera crisis for the first time in decades. We've had cholera in Syria. And now to have an earthquake, quite honestly, I didn't think there was another crisis that was going to be able to hit Syria. We'd had the full gamut. But 2 days ago to have that earthquake, it's almost beyond belief of how we can try and respond on those multiple compounding crises.
It really is. Many people want to help. How can international donors assist? Often aid is sent, but it's not necessarily the most useful.
Quite frankly, flexible funding. The resources we had pre-positioned supplies like key water and sanitation supplies, hygiene kits, water purification items, etc., in northwest Syria. But those were for an existing need with cholera, with conflict. So now with the earthquake, we're seeing how we can reposition those. But there were existing needs. We need to backfill those. We need to be able to assist children with psychosocial support, and that can take 9 to 12 months, or in bad cases, 2 years. So often with a crisis, there's looking at, okay, we'll need to fund a response for the next 3 months. But to fix a broken water system, so people can have reliable water, to fix a school that may have collapsed, to assist a child that has been through those constant rounds of trauma, We need to be able to have the flexible funding that allows us to see where those needs are, sufficient in an already underfunded crisis, but with enough length of time that allows for those responses that will actually help people, not just a tent or a bucket.
How long will the impact of this disaster be felt? How many months or years ahead are you planning for?
I mean, just to fix a water system, depending on how it has been damaged, will take at the very least 6 months. As I said, to provide case management for a child that's been traumatised could take up to 2 years. The degradation of all of the systems in Syria that is leading to rising malnutrition and has led to cholera actually impacting the country for the first time in recent history, it will require years and years of assistance.
Well, Melinda Young, you're facing a very difficult challenge ahead right now. Thank you so much for talking to us and sharing with us your experience. We wish you all the best and thank you.
No worries. Thanks very much.